Imagine handing George Washington an iPhone. Picture his weathered fingers, accustomed to quill pens and parchment, suddenly holding a device more powerful than any technology he could have conceived. Now imagine explaining that this device connects every American to a global network of information, and that the government he helped design now governs a nation of 330 million people where such technology shapes daily life. What would Washington think? What about Jefferson, who believed informed citizens were essential to democracy? Or Hamilton, who championed federal power? Or Madison, the architect of checks and balances? Over the course of this video, we're exploring how America's founders might react to 21st century America. From social media, democracy, to global military power, from economic inequality to surveillance technology, we'll discover that some aspects would thrill them, others would terrify them, and many would simply blow their minds. The founders weren't gods or prophets. They were brilliant, flawed humans grappling with the same questions we face today. How do you balance liberty with security? How do you prevent tyranny while maintaining effective government? Their answers shaped our world, but what would they think of what we've built?
This video presents a hypothetical educational analysis of how the Founding Fathers might view modern America, based on historical scholarship and their documented writings. All content and illustrations are for educational purposes only, encouraging critical thinking about constitutional principles without promoting any political viewpoint.
Chapter 1. The Technology Revolution, from quill pens to quantum computing. The founders lived in a world without electric lights. We live in a world where private companies launch rockets to Mars. Benjamin Franklin, the most scientific-minded founder, spent decades experimenting with electricity and inventing everything from bifocals to lightning rods. According to biographer Walter Isaacson, Franklin would be absolutely mesmerized by the Internet's democratization of information. Franklin founded libraries and newspapers because he believed knowledge should be shared freely. The Internet represents the ultimate realization of that vision. But Franklin was also pragmatic about human nature. He would likely be horrified by how the same technology spreads misinformation and creates echo chambers. Thomas Jefferson wrote that he would prefer newspapers without a government over government without newspapers. Jefferson believed informed citizens were essential to democracy. But what happens when being informed means processing more information in a single day than Jefferson encountered in months? Modern Americans are bombarded with more data than any human brain can reasonably evaluate. James Madison's greatest fear was that democracy would enable temporary majorities to oppress minorities. He designed the constitutional system to slow down political change, forcing careful deliberation. Social media democracy moves at light speed. Viral hashtags can end careers overnight. Public opinion shifts based on incomplete information that spreads faster than fact-checkers can respond. The founders would be amazed by technology's potential to educate and connect people, but they would recognize it as exactly the kind of force that could destroy the deliberative democracy they created. Chapter 2. The Federal Colossus, when government became everything they feared. Walk through Washington, D.C. today. The Pentagon houses 26,000 employees. The Department of Health and Human Services has a budget larger than most countries' entire GDP. The federal government employs 2.2 million civilian workers. When George Washington was president, the entire federal government employed fewer people than work in a single modern Walmart.
Alexander Hamilton wanted strong federal power to promote commerce and establish America as a world power. Modern America fulfills Hamilton's vision in many ways, but even Hamilton believed federal power should be limited to specific responsibilities. Modern agencies regulate local land use, educational curricula, and monitor private communications. Hamilton supported federal oversight of interstate commerce, but would he support federal regulation of bathroom facilities in schools? Thomas Jefferson would be absolutely horrified. Jefferson consistently argued for limited federal power, writing that the concentration of power in the same hands is precisely the definition of despotic government. He believed most decisions should be made locally, where citizens could participate directly. Jefferson envisioned a nation of independent farmers who governed themselves through local institutions. The modern administrative state, with vast bureaucracy making rules affecting every aspect of life, represents everything Jefferson warned against. But here's the complexity. Many problems the federal government addresses didn't exist in the founders' time. Environmental pollution crossing state boundaries, economic systems so interconnected that local regulation is meaningless, communication technologies requiring national coordination. George Washington warned against the spirit of party that puts partisan loyalty above national interest. According to presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, Washington would be alarmed by polarization that turns routine government functions into partisan battlegrounds. The founders created federalism because some problems require national solutions, but none would recognize the federal colossus that governs us today. Chapter 3: The Democratic Revolution, when everyone got a vote. When the Constitution was ratified, only white male property owners could vote, perhaps 10 to 15% of adults. The founders weren't necessarily opposed to broader participation, but they feared mob rule, large numbers of citizens without property or education making reckless decisions. Today, virtually every citizen over 18 can vote, regardless of property, education, or other qualifications. Women vote at higher rates than men and hold significant offices. African Americans have served as president and Supreme Court justices. The founders would have mixed reactions to this expansion. The philosophical logic always pointed toward broader inclusion. If governments derive power from consent of the governed and all people possess natural rights, then ultimately all should have a voice. Thomas Jefferson's "all men are created equal" contained revolutionary potential even Jefferson didn't fully embrace. According to historian Joseph Ellis, Jefferson understood slavery contradicted American principles but couldn't envision practical equality given his era's systems. But the founders would worry about democratic participation on this scale, producing wise governance. They designed the system assuming political participation would be limited to citizens with education, property, and leisure time to study issues carefully. They never imagined democracy shaped by 30-second TV ads or viral social media posts. The founders assumed American citizens would share fundamental values, despite disagreements. Modern democracy includes citizens from every continent, practicing dozens of religions, working in industries that didn't exist when the Constitution was written. This diversity enriches society, but makes democratic consensus more challenging. According to political scientist Robert Putnam, the founders designed democracy for high social capital, dense civic networks creating trust between different groups. The founders would see expanded voting rights as consistent with American principles, while worrying whether social foundations for democratic governance have kept pace. Chapter 4: The Economic Empire, from Farms to Global Finance. In 1790, over 90% of Americans worked in agriculture.
Most owned land or expected to acquire it. Economic relationships were local and simple. Today, less than 2% work in agriculture. Most work for wages rather than owning businesses. The economy is dominated by massive corporations and global supply chains. Alexander Hamilton predicted this transformation. His report on manufactures envisioned America becoming an industry powerhouse, competing with Britain economically and militarily. But even Hamilton couldn't imagine the scale of modern capitalism. Apple has market capitalization larger than most nations' GDP. Amazon can deliver products nationwide within 24 hours. These corporations wield power rivaling governments. Thomas Jefferson would be deeply troubled by economic concentration. Jefferson believed widespread property ownership was essential to Republican government because economic independence enabled political independence. Jefferson's ideal America was small farmers and artisans owning their tools and land, beholden to no one. Modern wage labor economy, where citizens depend on employers for health insurance and retirement benefits, would strike Jefferson as potentially incompatible with political freedom. Current wealth inequality, where the top 1% control about 40% of wealth, would concern most founders. According to economist Thomas Piketty, this approaches Gilded Age levels. James Madison wrote that the most common source of factions has been the various and unequal distribution of property. But Madison assumed conflicts between different types of property owners, not between property owners and non-property owners. The founders would be amazed by modern prosperity, while concerned about whether such economic complexity and inequality could coexist with stable democracy. Chapter 5. America as Global Empire, when the Republic became world policeman. The U.S. military maintains 750 bases in 80-plus countries. The Pentagon's budget exceeds $700 billion. American culture shapes global trends. The dollar serves as the world's reserve currency. George Washington's farewell address warned against entangling alliances and urged America to focus domestically rather than on foreign adventures. Washington believed geographic isolation provided unique opportunity to avoid European power politics. He envisioned America as an example to the world, not its ruler. According to historian Walter McDowell, Washington wanted America to be a promised land, attracting admiration through success, not an empire imposing will through force. Thomas Jefferson shared suspicions about military power and foreign entanglements. Jefferson believed America's mission was demonstrating that Republican government could work, inspiring others to follow voluntarily. But Jefferson authorized Lewis and Clark's expedition and purchased Louisiana, doubling the nation's size. The question is whether Jefferson would see modern global influence as beneficial expansion of Republican principles or dangerous imperial overreach. Alexander Hamilton would likely be more comfortable with global dominance. Hamilton understood that national power required international respect, and respect required ability to project force when necessary. Modern America's position as dominant military and economic power represents fulfillment of Hamilton's nationalist ambitions. James Madison would face complex challenges evaluating American global power. Madison understood republics needed to encompass diverse interests to prevent single factions from dominating. Global influence could extend this principle internationally. But Madison designed constitutional checks and balances to constrain power. The national security apparatus managing global influence operates with less oversight than Madison would consider safe. John Adams warned America should not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy, because doing so would transform the republic into an empire. modern America faces exactly Adams' predicted dilemma: global responsibilities requiring enormous resources, which required domestic powers the founders would consider dangerous to Republican government. Chapter 6: The Surveillance Revolution, when Big Brother learned to code. The NSA monitors billions of communications daily. Government agencies track citizens through license plates, facial recognition, and cell phone data. Every online search and credit card purchase potentially becomes permanent record, accessible with minimal oversight. This would terrify every founder, particularly those who escaped what they saw as British tyranny. The Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures because founders experienced British general warrants, allowing searches without specific justification. George Washington valued privacy so highly, he developed elaborate codes for correspondence and refused to let anyone read over his shoulder. Real-time government monitoring of private communications would strike Washington as tyrannical. But Washington also understood intelligence gathering's importance for national security. As Revolutionary War commander, he ran extensive spy networks against British forces. Thomas Jefferson believed citizen privacy was crucial to democratic participation. People needed to think, speak, and associate freely without fear of retaliation for democratic institutions to function. Modern surveillance creates possibilities for both governmental and social tyranny Jefferson couldn't imagine. When companies track behavior and sell information to employers and agencies, the line between public and private authority disappears. Alexander Hamilton believed in strong executive power and effective law enforcement. He might see modern surveillance as better tools for legitimate functions like preventing terrorism and investigating crimes. But Hamilton also believed in constitutional limits and due process. Mass surveillance treating every citizen as potential suspect would concern Hamilton as both unjust and ineffective. Benjamin Franklin's observation that those who give up essential liberty to purchase temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety directly addresses surveillance trade-offs. The founders would support reasonable surveillance with proper judicial oversight and public accountability, but they would see current capabilities as exactly that unchecked governmental power that led them to revolt against British rule. What would the founders ultimately think of modern America? They would be amazed, horrified, proud, and deeply worried, often about the same developments. They would marvel at American prosperity, innovation, and global influence. Their experimental republic, becoming the world's dominant power, would vindicate their belief that free institutions could compete with traditional monarchies. They would take pride in progress toward equality their documents promised, but their society couldn't deliver. Expanded rights to women, minorities, and previously excluded groups represents logical fulfillment of all men are created equal. But they would worry America has lost social and cultural foundations they considered essential to Republican government. The founders assumed democracy required citizens who were economically independent, socially connected to communities, and educated enough to make informed choices. Modern America challenges all three assumptions. Most Americans depend on employers rather than owning independent property. Many live in communities with limited personal relationships. Political information comes through entertainment-focused media rather than educational content. The founders would see these as potentially dangerous to democratic institutions, even though the same changes expanded opportunities and freedoms. Most importantly, they would recognize that fundamental governance challenges haven't changed despite transformed circumstances. How do you balance individual liberty with collective security? How do you prevent majorities from oppressing minorities? How do you maintain effective government without tyranny? These are the same questions the founders grappled with. We're still grappling with them now. The founders' greatest insight was that there are no permanent solutions, only ongoing processes of constitutional government, democratic debate, and individual responsibility requiring constant citizen attention. They designed institutions not to solve governance problems once and for all, but to provide frameworks for addressing problems as they evolve. Modern America represents both success and ongoing challenge of that design. We've preserved constitutional framework while adapting to unimaginable circumstances. Benjamin Franklin, asked what government the convention created, reportedly replied, "A republic if you can keep it." The founders understood keeping a republic would require each generation to understand, value, and actively participate in self-government institutions. They would see modern challenges not as proof their system failed, but as evidence it's working exactly as designed, forcing Americans to grapple seriously with eternal tensions between freedom and order that define democratic life. The question they would ask us is not whether we've solved these problems, but whether we're taking them seriously enough to preserve institutions that let us keep working on solutions. The founders would remind us that experiments can always fail if experimenters stop paying attention to what they're doing. What aspects of modern America do you think would most surprise the Founding Fathers? How would they want us to address today's challenges? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more educational content exploring the ideas that shape our world.